G'day, welcome to Pay It Forward. Now, most of you know that I'm a huge Disney fan, and so it would come no surprise to you that today's project is a little Disney based. Who remembers the Aristocats? I was obsessed as a child with this movie. It's a very old animated movie, one of their first, and I loved little Marie, the little white kitten. I always wanted a little white kitten just like Marie. And my little granddaughter is going to be receiving this bag, so I put it together in all of her favourite colours, and I think that it's absolutely delightful. Now it's fully lined, it's got a little pocket inside, it's great for little ones to keep little special treasures in. So I hope you've got someone wonderful to make this one for. I've got your free pattern all ready for you. It is in with your video details below, and you'll be able to print out those free pattern templates. Now make sure that you set your printer to be printing at actual size. Check it in the settings, and your pattern pieces will be absolutely spot on. And remember that I add all seam allowances to all of my pattern pieces, so you don't have to worry about any of that. So let's get busy sewing. So let's have a look at our materials and requirements that we're going to need. I'm just using my quilting cotton as the outer for this bag, and I have interfaced that with my Fusible Woven medium weight interfacing. So I have a front and a back piece. You've got your templates there, and the front piece has the little kitty shaped ears on it. You'll also need a base for that one. We're going to be sewing in a base. So my lining fabric is this one. So I've made the base of the outer bag this colour as well. So it's a bit of it'll turn up a little at the bottom, and we'll be able to see that different print. So that's your outer bag. Your inner bag pieces are exactly the same, and you just cut them in something to suit to be a lining. And this time I've brought in another print, the little polka dot for the base of the lining, and also I will use that same polka dot print for my little inside pocket, and that doesn't have any interfacing on it, that's just fabric there. So that's our outer bag and our inner bag. And then we're going to need our wadding. So you've got wadding pieces, your templates are there. Use a fusible wadding, and I've cut my front piece, my back piece, and my base piece there. So then we're looking at our applique. So as I said, I've based this design on Marie from the Aristocats, and we have her face pieces there. So I've started with a cream fabric for the main headpiece. All of these pieces have fusible webbing applied, and the facial features I've cut all from felt. So, but I do think that fabric works best for the head. We're going to be stitching this all on the machine, and so I just think it all sits flatter and more professional that way. So what we have are our two inner ear pieces, our two eyebrow pieces, our two eyelash pieces. Marie has a very light blue circle, eye circle, so I've gone with that there. And the buttons that you choose for the eyes, the perfect size for Marie is 1.5 centimetres. So if you can get a button exactly that size, it will be really authentic. Now, if you can find a 4-hole button, it's going to allow us to add a little white highlight in the eyes. So if you can find a 4-hole button, it will work even better. So we've got our nose, our mouth, the little tongue, and that little collar there. I'm also going to be adding a little heart button there, just to pretty it all up, hanging from that collar. And I will be adding a bow at the top when we're all done. I will probably go with the pink there. And I will add a little D-clip to my handle as I put that in, just so that I can hang a bag charm, because I nearly always add a little tassel, a little felt tassel. And we also need our strap. So this time the strap is being sewn into our bag, into the side seams, so we don't need any hardware here. So the width of your strap is 6 centimetres, but it can be as long as you like. So best to measure, take a measurement for the person you're making it for, then you'll get it exact. I'm making mine quite short here for my young granddaughter. So mine's about 70 centimetres long. But of course you can lengthen that as much as you like. So that's about it. So to start with, we're going to remove all these little face pieces, and we're going to start with the outer front and our face piece. Now I've removed that backing fabric to that fusible webbing so that we can press that one on. Because I'm using a white creamy fabric over a very colourful print, it can be a little bit see-through, so I've also added first some interfacing, some white interfacing to try and block that colour, and then I've added my fusible webbing. So the position for this one, we're going to iron this one into place with a hot iron and a protective cloth. You want to leave room around that ear and the top of the head, because this is going to be our seam, and the very edge of our ear is going to pop up over the top of that bag. So you really want to make sure it's all even and positioned into place there, and you'll see that it will fit really well. So let's get that one pressed into place, and I will show you the kind of stitching I'm going to be doing. So there you can see, once I have that face section pressed on, I've gone ahead on my machine and sewn around the entire lower edge, the entire outside edge with my satin stitch on the machine. So very close together zigzag stitch, and I've gone for a dark grey, so not as harsh as black. I want to outline this and give it that animated look, but because she's a very pinky whitey little cat, I don't want to overpower it with the black. We will use a little bit of black, but not on this outer edge. So a nice deep grey works really well for that section. So now my next pieces to press on are that little kitty collar and the ear pieces. Now the ear pieces, they just sit to follow the curve line of that head. If you can imagine that curve continuing on, and they sit with just a little bit of space around that lower edge there. So there's more white showing on this side than the other. So I will get those into exactly in the right position, make sure that they're the same on either side, get those pressed into place, and then you can stitch those on the machine. Now you can either use just a straight machine stitch if you like, or you can do what I'm going to do. I'm going to continue with that very close zigzag. I will change the width here and there just to suit the size of the pieces. So now I've got the ears in place and that little collar, and so we're going to add the next pieces piece by piece so we get them all exactly right. So the next piece to go on is your little open mouth piece. That actually sits 4 centimeters exactly from the bottom of that collar, and you want to line it up and make sure it's right in the center, and you've got a nice point there at the top of the lip, so you can line that up. So I press that one on, and then I add that little tongue section. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to stitch just the lower edge, and I'm going to stitch, mine is actually a very deep claret color, a real deep burgundy. So I'm going to do that same zigzag stitch around that whole lower edge. And then I'm just going to use my pink to go across the top of the tongue. So I'm keeping with the colour tones there. So we're going to do that first, and then when we do the little lip line at the top here, we're going to carry on and do the little smile. So we'll do that next. So once the mouth is in place, I'm going to go ahead and I've drawn in my top lip line. So what I've used is I've got a 25mm wooden disc here, so you can see that works perfectly, and it matches the curve of the top of the mouth. You can do the same thing with the bottom of a cotton reel. So you see it's exactly the right size, and I've drawn my marks in with a heat erasable marker so I can stitch perfectly on that line. You can see that the curve almost starts coming back on itself here. Just make sure it's even both sides. And I'm actually going to stitch that full smile in and across the top there, and this time I'm actually going to use black because I really want that to stand out. I will still do a close zigzag for this one because it's a fairly substantial line, and I'll keep those stitches nice and close together. So let me get that one stitched in place and show you how that looks. So I've got a nice clean lip line there now, and you can see my next step is going to be to add that nose. Now the nose sits just 1/2 centimetre from the very point. So just 1/2 centimetre up, and that's where it will sit. But you can see what I've done is I have just drawn a line and stitched about 3 times back and forth using a straight stitch this time to create that lip separation there. So now I can go ahead and press that nose into place, leaving just that 5 millimeters, and I will stitch around that nose using my same zigzag stitch, and then we will move on to the rest. We will add our whiskers at the end. So our next pieces to go on are the eye circles. So the blue eye circles that I have here. Now, just to try and help you out a bit with placement, I've given you on your template some little marker points that you can add now to the front of that face, so long as you have kept to the measurements on these sections here, and do make sure that you have before you put these marks in. You can go ahead and add those couple of marks still with a heat erasable pen, as you can see I've got there now. So that's now, it's given me a really good guide for where those eye pieces should go, and they are a little ellipse shape, they're not a circle. So at the 2 narrowest ends, that's where they sit, end to end like that, and that will give you that same little tilt as well. So have a look at that. It will certainly help you for lining those up. And when we do that, as we're pressing them on, we're going to tuck the little lash section underneath the top. So just do one at a time so that you get it right. Now we really just want some of that lash showing at the top outer edge of the eye and extending out beyond. So if you do one and then match it up perfectly with the other side, and then you can go ahead and we're going to do our stitching. Now this time our stitching is going to be a little bit different because we're going to stitch in black from the top here of this side where the lash starts, that same zigzag stitch around just to the base corner here in black. And then we're going to stitch the lower edge in something that coordinates with your blue or whatever colour you're using here. And it just gives the eye a little bit more perspective, and it'll line it out beautifully. So I'm going to get it on and get that stitching done so you can see exactly what I mean. So you can see there what I meant about the stitching half in the black from that bottom corner edge to the top there of your lash line on both sides, and then just the underside in the colour. I've gone just for a light grey. And what that does is it gives the eyes a little bit of perspective. So when we add those little buttons in place, we get that nice shadow over the top of the pupil, and it just all works. So we're going to be adding those buttons once we've got our wadding in place. So our next step is you can go ahead and press on those little eyebrows, and I will just stitch a straight stitch to hold those in place. You can see where I've got them there, just up the top and curved upwards for that little happy look. And now I've taken my heat erasable pen again and using a fairly broad curve, so I'm just using this old paper roll here. I've just drawn 3 whiskers on each side, and they start right on that little lip line there. So just the center one is longest, and bring the other ones in just a little bit shorter. They don't have to be exactly mirrored, but get them fairly even. And so I will also stitch back and forth over those lines with a straight stitch in black. And that has all of the work on my kitty front all completed. So what I've gone ahead and done there is I've added my wadding to the back. I've pressed that on. I've also added it to the back of the other side of the bag, and also the base of that outer bag. So that's all ready. But before I do that, I'm going to add my 2 final touches, which are my eyes. Now those eyes, I gave you that measurement, 1.5 centimeters for the perfect size eye. They do sit right down in that corner. Marie almost looks slightly cross-eyed, but not quite. You see that expression is really sweet. So I'm going to stitch those on now because I've got that wadding on the back and it will have more hold and sit deeper. I'm also going to be adding that lovely button. You can add anything you like there, any kind of little details, anything you want to add to the front of the bag, do it now. We do add that bow last, once the bag's all put together. So I'm going to get those all stitched into place. And that is my completed bag front. Now you might remember me saying at the beginning, if you can use a 4-hole button on those eyes, do so, because you can see I've just stitched them on in black. Then I've taken some white extra strong thread. I've positioned my buttons so two of those holes, are at the top. And then I've just made about 3 stitches in white only in those top 2 holes. So it's the highlight in the eye is sitting on the upper side of the button. And you can see it just really brings those eyes to life. So it's definitely worth finding a 4-hole if you can. So added my little neck button there, and now we're ready to start putting this bag together. So we're going to take our back piece, we're going to line those up, and I'm going to use my clips to clip those in place. We're going to be stitching our side seams first of all. Now the seam allowance throughout this bag is 5 millimeters. I'm going to do the same with the other side. Make sure you're lining everything up well, and I will just stitch. Make sure you're back and forth on your start and finish and stitch both of those side seams. Okay, so I quickly turned that through and I did press those seams out, and I've pressed the base of the seams open and flat and up the top as well, just so it's easier for us to be putting everything together. So next we're going to add our base. So we want to line up our base center mark on the end. We're putting right sides together, of course. Line up that mark with one of your center seams. And we're just going to pop a pin through there, straight through, and make sure it's going straight through the center of that seam. And then you can do the same with the opposite side. If you followed your seam allowance as well, this base gusset will fit in really easily. Pin all the way through, and then it's just a matter of pinning those edges up to match. I like to take my pin through both, take up a little only on one side, push my pin head all the way down, and I go from side to side pinning so that I'm getting that in nice and even. Again, through both, flip it over, a little on the other side. That way I'm really pinning it in 3D. You can see it's much easier to pin that way, and it's easier to stitch that way. So once I have this all pinned into place, I take the time to sew just an overcasting tacking stitch all the way around. So once that's all pinned in, I'll just use my extra strong thread and I'll just go around with an overcasting stitch so that I can remove all of those pins. And once I've done that, I'm then just going to take it to my machine and stitch that same 5 millimeter seam allowance right the way around that base. I have that completed outer bag all done. You can see what I said about that little turn up on the sides there, how you get that little glimpse of that print underneath. So beautiful little outer bag all ready to go. So we can move on to our lining. Now our lining is put together in exactly the same way, but before we go ahead and do that, we're going to create the pocket that we're going to add to the inside of the lining. So I've got right sides together there with my pocket, and of course you can change the size of this pocket and the shape of this pocket. I'm just going to have it stitched up halfway, so we've got a pocket here and a little shallow pocket here for very necessary little 7-year-old lip gloss, something like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to stitch around the whole outside edge. I'm going to leave a little opening at the base here, and I'm going to keep that seam very small, just 3 or 4 millimeters, and then I will turn that through, give it a good press, and we will position it in place on the inside of our bag. So now I have turned through my little pocket piece, and as I've done that, I've taken it to the iron and given it a press, and I've turned that opening under there, you can see. And so then I've pressed it up to create, I'm having two pockets, so one here and one here. So now I just position it on the one of the pieces of my lining. I like to put it on the back of the bag lining. I just think it works better on the back of the bag. And now all I need to do is make sure it's nicely centered, and I'm just going to stitch. Make sure you're back and forth on the start and finish and where that pocket starts. Down, around, across the base and up here, so that I've got access to both of those pockets there. I have that pocket nicely in place there now, and now this is a little added extra. If you want to add a little more security to the bag, you can add a little magnetic closure. They're very inexpensive and they're very easy to add. So, but if you don't want to add any type of closing, that's fine. It's a little tote that holds together very well. It's got a narrow top. So, but I'm going to add one because I happen to have one. So, and I have marked on your pattern template where that needs to go. So if you haven't added one of these before, you've got your two pieces. You've got your receiver piece and your positive piece that goes in there, and you've got your two little washers that go on the back. So you use your washer to mark in your two little lines there that I've got, and you just make two little cuts, and then we're just going to add that one through. Turn that over, make sure that that's really pressed down well, and you just fold in those tabs. And they're very, very secure and just so simple to put in. So we're just going to add the other part on the opposite side so that the lining sections will close together inside of the bag. All done. So now we just construct the lining pieces of the bag. Oh, that's clicked there already, very efficient. And so we're going to put it together in the same way that we did the outer bag, and that is that we're going to sew the side seams, then we're going to give them a press top and bottom, and then we're going to add that base. Now as you add the base, we're going to leave a large section open. So instead of sewing it all the way around this time, a big section open, because that's how we're going to turn the whole bag through when we're finished. So just remember, and I just do it fully along the straight edge once that curve stops. So it's probably about 15 centimeters, I would say, that we leave open. And while I'm at the machine, I'm going to also go ahead and sew up my strap. So whatever length your strap is, you'll have it folded into the center from each side first, and then press those edges together so you get a nice narrow strap. It's nice and strong because it's 4 layers of fabric, and I'm going to just top stitch close to the edge on both sides right the way down. Then that will be ready to pop into that seam. So I have my lining all stitched up and turned through, and I've temporarily just pressed under those edges of that opening so that it's easier to stitch when we get to there. So our next step is to put the lining inside the bag, but before we do that, we've got to add our strap. So you can see that I've just stitched just within the seam allowance that strap into place, and I did add my little D clip so that I've got something to hang a bag charm on. And I have to confess that when I made this bag up as a sample, I was so excited about it that I didn't add the strap, and I so carefully added the liner and lined everything up and did all of my stitching and turned it through and realised that there was no strap. And Suffice to say, I wasn't happy, and I'm glad I was alone in the workroom. The word I'm searching for I can't say because there are preschool toys present. But don't forget the strap, so I've added it there now already. So let's go ahead and tuck this lining into our bag. So the outer bag is turned inside out and the inner bag is the right way, and we're just going to tuck it in. And what we're looking to do is we're wanting to line up our side seams. And you can see there, I want to absolutely make sure they're right on top of each other. I'm going to use a clip there to hold that. And then pull around the other side and do the same thing. And I have pressed those seams open and flat, so it's much easier to do that, and it cuts down on the bulk in that area because we have got that bag handle there as well. And so now all I have to do is line those two edges up, and if you followed your seam allowances, I'm sure you have, it will all line up beautifully there. It will fit in nice and snug. And I'll just clip that all the way around. And of course, very important to line up that front section perfectly with those ears. You see that will there. And once I go to stitch, I'm just going to stitch around the entire top edge, because remember we've got that opening in the lining to pull everything through. Now when you're stitching this front section, which has your ears, you can see, because you've got your stitching line, your applique line, you don't want to go too close to that. So I've actually, on your pattern, you've got a little bit more room this side. So you want to stitch just a little away from that actual edge there, so that we're not stitching into that applique section. So stitch all the way around, and then we'll come and turn it through. So before I turn my bag through, I've trimmed the seam around that ear section and clipped into those little curves there, and just taken the tips off the ears. Don't clip into your stitching. And now we're just going to turn that one through that opening that we left in the base there. So the whole lot will come through, and we will push out all of those seams. Pop that all through. And now, before we do anything else, we're going to take that back to the machine, and we're going to sew up that opening that we left. So I've already had my edges pressed under, so it's going to make the job a whole lot easier. So just a little top stitch just to close that opening. So you can see there that I've turned that one all through, and I've given it a good press. Make sure that you really press out those ears, push those ears out before you sew up that opening in that lining. So then once it's all pressed, I've gone ahead and I've stitched a top stitch to keep those edges together from each ear right the way around. I haven't stitched up around the top edge of the ears. I guess you can if you like. I find once you add the little bow or whatever you're putting as a top knot there, you can stitch through those layers, and that holds it really well. I've added a little Tassel Bag Charm. You'll find the pattern for that in my video list. Very simple felt tassel, and they come in handy for so many projects. Alternatively, you could add another little bag charm I've got on my video list there. It's a little heart. That would look beautiful too. And I did think last week's project was my little Kimmy doll with the kitty, and you could definitely substitute the bear for the little kitty. Wouldn't that be sweet? So there's so many different things you could do by mixing up my patterns too. So remember, all of those little bits and pieces can often be taken throughout all of the different projects. But if you love making little bags, have a look at my playlist of bags. There's quite a few there. Little closure there, little pocket inside. It's just come together absolutely beautifully. I hope that you have somebody really special to make this one for. Well, thank you all for joining me today. I thoroughly enjoyed making this little one up and designing it. If ever I could be addicted to anything, making anything, I think it's these little boutique style bags. So I hope you love it too. If you have, you could give me a thumbs up. That would be absolutely beaut. And also, it doesn't have to be a white kitty, of course. It can be any coloured kitty. You'll be able to personalise it to your needs. I'd love to see it made up with a little black and white kitty and a little ginger kitty. So I'm sure you're all over that, and I'm looking forward to seeing your pictures on Facebook. If you haven't joined us yet, come and join us. I'll put that link down in the video details below as well. Everybody, everything's heating up for masterclass. Very much looking forward to it. Very excited to hear you're all pretty keen. So I'm going to let you know as soon as that launch date is set. In the meantime, everybody, keep on being creative and stay safe. And most of all, pay all of those good things forward. Until next time, it's hooroo from me.